Okay, now we're going.
Oh, now we're on?
Now we're on.
All righty. Well, the purpose of this series of teachings is to present the Bible to somebody who's never read it before. And there's a number of contexts that we could do that in. One is we could just take somebody off the street and say, hey, have you ever read the Bible? No, I haven't. Here, let me tell you about it. Another way to do it is to perhaps make things more difficult by trying to deal with every objection everybody has about the Bible and all the rumors they've heard about it or anything else. I don't really want to do that either. There are a lot of people who deal with those kinds of issues. What I'm interested in doing is looking at the Bible as though we were shortly after the time of Christ and we were non-Jewish people. So what would an apostle tell the Greeks about Jesus Christ? Okay, now why do I want to take that approach? One of them is that the Bible was a known entity to some degree, not in the same context that we have it today, but people around the world knew of the Jews. They knew that they were the children of God. They had had interactions with them through wars and conquering them and being conquered and all of that. They had rumors over the many centuries about Israel coming out of Egypt. So there was a knowledge that these people were around. And they were known for having prophets. They were known for God doing things among them. And so they were kind of a people that you wanted to hold at a distance, and yet at the same time there was that curiosity about them because of that special relationship they seemed to have with God. Now, I believe that that's an accurate context for what the world was like during that time. Now, people today will argue with that. They'll say, oh no, the Jews are just this or that or the other thing, and we're not even going to go there, okay? Because it's not real. Until 200 years ago, the world generally believed the account of the Bible for creation. Okay? And why was that? As we go through the Bible, we'll see that most of the world had a direct knowledge of the events of creation, and of the events of the flood, and of the events of the Tower of Babel. And so we should expect that ancient cultures would have a memory of these things within their own culture, although they might look a little bit differently, as some of them were transmitted orally versus being transmitted in writing. So I don't think that we're doing a disservice by placing ourselves 2,000 years ago. Okay? The other thing we want to do is we would like to look at the Bible from the point of view of somebody who believes it. Okay? If you go and you say, oh, I just saw this, I'm going to go watch this Disney movie about some little mermaid, and the person says, yeah, mermaids are junk, they're all blah, 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 and they go on about trash on mermaids, are you going to get a good feel for what the Little Mermaid's all about? Probably not, okay? So you are certainly welcome to go to atheists, agnostics, everybody else to find out about the Bible. But you probably aren't going to get a good idea of what it is unless you actually ask somebody who appreciates the Bible. Okay? And so that's what I hope to do, is to give you a perspective from somebody who appreciates the Bible, perhaps more so than most. And because of that, there are certain things that I'm just going to assume to be true. You're welcome to argue with somebody else about it, okay? But I'm just going to assume they're true because, in fact, the Bible assumes they're just true. And so that's the approach I'm going to take to it, as though what it says is what's really true about it. Okay? So with that in mind, we say, well, what actually is the Bible before we get started? And the fact of the matter is that until a few hundred years before the time of Christ, there wasn't even a concept of a Bible. There were Hebrew writings, but they were not canonized. They were not collected into a set of books until a couple hundred years before the time of Christ. Now this is convenient because we can then say, okay, the books that Jesus used are books that we might be interested in. Okay? The idea of Scripture being a holy writing, that's actually a concept that's new to us. They were the writings, and in those writings God said. And so it was just taken at face value that that's what God said, because that's what they recorded, see. And so we have gone a step in Christianity to elevate certain writings and call them scripture as though they are special in some way. I'm not saying they're not special, they are. But that's a foreign concept. Okay? They were the writings of the Jews. Okay? And the Jews wrote about the history of the Jews and how God interacted with them. See? And so to think of them as mystical or magical or something else like that is a foreign concept to it. They are a record of Judaism, of the Hebrews. I shouldn't use the word Judaism, of the Hebrews prior to the time of Christ. So the Bible, the New Testament Bible, did not come into a canonized state until hundreds of years after the time of Christ. What happened was people wrote letters containing the teaching of the apostles, and they got collected and passed around from church to church and used. And then very much later somebody said, hey, we should collect these into a group so we know which ones are important. Okay, that's our canon. But again, the term scripture doesn't have the meaning that we sometimes impose upon it. They are the writings of the apostles. Okay? And we need to view it that way. Now, I'm not minimizing the supernatural aspect of this book at all. Okay? And you'll see that very shortly. But the collection of books, which book belongs in the canon or not, is something that most people think that we have to trust somebody else to tell us. So somebody decided which books belong in the Old Testament. Somebody else decided which books fall into the New Testament. And so if we find another ancient book, all of a sudden we have this discussion as to whether it belongs in the Bible or not. Okay? We don't have to have that discussion. In fact, you can know for yourself which books are God-inspired and which ones aren't. Okay? And that's really going to be the heart of this teaching. Is not do we just accept something by faith that it's from God, but how do we know it's from God? Okay? How do we dynamically involve ourselves with it and with God to know that it is His Word? Okay? And the proposition is that God has left His fingerprints on it in such a way that it is undeniably of divine origin. Okay? And I know that sounds crazy. It'll sound crazier as we go along. Okay? But today you can pick up any book and determine whether or not it is God-inspired because of that fingerprint that God has on it. Okay? So you can go through the various collections of books in various things called the Bible, and you can determine for yourself which ones are divinely inspired or not. Okay? And it's this fingerprint that is missing from books that are not divinely inspired.
So you mean that there is some books right now in our Bible that are not divinely inspired?
Well, I'm saying I don't know what our Bible is unless we want to define the list of books. But certainly in the Catholic Bible, there are books there that do not display the fingerprint of God.
Okay. Well, that's fair enough. But in our Bible, the one that we read
The one we generally consider the Protestant Bible has that fingerprint on all of them.
Okay, that's what I
And that would include Maccabees, for example. The book of Maccabees are in the...
I don't see it in Maccabees. And we can examine that individually to look at it. But like I say, the ones from the Catholic Bible that are not in the Protestant Bible, they don't display it. There's a reason why they don't, actually, theologically. God had told Israel that He wasn't going to speak to them for 400 years. And so why would we expect divinely inspired writings during those 400 years? See? And so we don't see the fingerprint on those things. Now, does that mean they're not good books? No, they're good books for whatever their purpose it is. Okay. One of the new ones is the Gospel of Thomas. Does it belong in the Bible? Probably not. You know, is it a good book? Yeah, it's a good book. It's not Gnostic, and we can talk about that much later. Okay. But he talks about the fingerprint of God, basically, and how to identify books that have that fingerprint. But that's what we're going to see is how do we identify the book? And we're not going to do that directly because it can get really boring. Okay, what we want to see is what does the Bible say? And why is that important to us? But it is critical that we know that we can identify which books are divinely inspired and which ones aren't.